The true story of Stuart Long, the boxer turned priest, is a tale of family heartache, suffering, and redemption. And the two stars of the new film, Mark Wahlberg and Mel Gibson, are together to talk about Father Stu in a World Over exclusive. He's a rock and roll Hall of Fame legend, still going strong after 60 years in the business. DION returns to tell us about The Wanderer, a new stage musical based on his amazing life. What can we learn from some of the great female heroes of the Bible? Fox News host Shannon Bream shares her timely new book, The Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak. Finally, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, joins us from Rome with an update on the latest news from the Vatican. The World Over begins right now.
Now, Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. We have a very special show for you tonight. If you'd like to comment, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. Lots to cover this evening. Let's get right to it. We have something special for you, an exclusive interview with Mark Wahlberg, Mel Gibson, stars of the new film, Father Stu. Joining them is writer and director of the film, Rosalind Ross. I sat down with them all at Sony's studio, which is the old MGM lot in L.A. We talked about the movie, how it came to be, and the incredible story of Father Stuart Long, the subject of the film, a fighter turned actor who smashed into his calling in dramatic fashion. Mel Gibson also discusses the current state of his Passion of the Christ sequel. Here's my exclusive interview with Mark Wahlberg, Mel Gibson, and Rosalind Ross. Mark, you've been all over the country with this movie. I mean, screening after screening. What's been the reaction to those who are faith-based as well as folks who perhaps aren't?
Just how moved they are by the movie, the story, how inspired they are, how much hope they're finding in the story. It's amazing to see people laughing and crying, and in the midst of tears, then more laughter erupts. You know, I haven't been in the theater for a long time, and for the first time in, you know, over 2 years, to see it with a full audience and see the reaction was
incredible.
It made all the risk worth it, for sure.
What surprised you as you watched it with them? Audience always tells you something different than you imagined you put there.
When and where they laugh, the difference between the laugh that a movie gets when you're watching it amongst industry people as opposed to an audience in Boston or in Chicago or in Dallas, for that matter. But really, you know, people moved by the story in a way, because it obviously it affects everybody in a different way, but it definitely affects everybody.
Now, Mel, this movie's premiering Holy Week, which is familiar territory. If Johnny Mathis is Mr. Christmas, you may be Mr. Holy Week, and this guy's going to be, you know, chasing your tail. Give me the importance of why this is premiering now during Holy Week, and what that might accent in the audience as they go to see it.
Well, I think a lot of people at this time of the year, they kind of take stock of themselves. They're introspective about who they are, where are they going, what's the purpose of their life, what's their journey, where are they at in it. And something like this, I think it's a contemplation on someone else's life, and it's an exemplary life. And it reaffirmed me when I watched it, because it says, you know, no matter where you come from, and no matter what afflicts you, you know, you can triumph, and you can grow through that, and gain merit, and hand it to other people.
Rose, you directed this movie. You're not Catholic, but I have to tell you, this may be one of the most Catholic contemporary movies anybody's likely to see. How did you find that that understanding of suffering, and how at times the pain and the suffering in life can lead you to your ultimate destination, to what God intends for you?
Father Stu was a living embodiment of grace and strength in suffering. And, you know, you hear it from anybody whose life he touched, that he was incredibly grateful for what afflicted him, and had such sort of dignity and strength in it. His life is such a beautiful example of humility, you know, of you've got this guy who was a fighter who fought everybody, you know, an opponent in a ring, a guy in a bar. He fought the hand that was dealt to him in life. He fought for his father's approval, and it wasn't until he found God that he realized he could surrender a bit, you know. And I think he learned that staying in the fight on your feet isn't always as effective as getting on your knees and admitting that you can't do it alone.
Mark, I have to tell you, when we last talked, I know there was some concern about the language and that might keep even religious leaders in dioceses at arm's length. The Diocese of Helena just came out with a review. I'll just read a little piece of this. They said, it's our hope that the redemptive story of Father Stu's conversion will invite viewers to faith and strengthen believers. Are you surprised that they're accepting of the authenticity of even that rough language, because it gives you this guy in their world?
I was a bit surprised that they had an issue with it initially.
Oh, really?
Actually, whoever got a glimpse of the script may have seen an F-bomb or two in the first couple of pages and been turned off by that. But to have them see the movie and respond the way that they did was the most important thing. So to get their approval, most importantly, to get Bill's approval, Father Bart, who is Stu's best friend, I mean, and Archbishop Thomas, I mean, those are the people that I was really concerned with. Yeah. And to see them respond to the film in the way they didn't realize how necessary the language was to be far more authentic and, you know, connect with real people, because you hear this language everywhere you go. You know, it was important.
Well, and the journey.
I think it was essential that Rosie didn't intend to preach to the choir. You know, it's a story for everybody.
Well, and also you have to do justice to a kind of rough character
he was
in order to underscore how incredible his transformation was. So
yeah, you can only put so much emphasis on, oh shucks, you know, it's
snakes in a bag.
Gosh darn it, I swear to you. But that being said, I mean, I do remember, like, after we're kind of in post-production, like, Rosie, you got to cut up some of these F-bombs. She's like, well, a lot of these you just added along the way. I was constantly pushing the envelope. And we wanted to be as edgy as possible because we thought, ultimately, you know, that'd be the thing that people related to
and
the
draw a
most.
younger audience.
And then, of course, when you see, when he makes the real commitment and when he finds his purpose, that's when, and that's unwavering, that, you know, people would be encouraged by that.
You know something, Father? There's a sign on the wall in my gym back home. Hope is not a tactic. I took that one to heart. Fought for everything I earned. This ain't no different. I think I know what God's doing here. Seeing how I respond, I don't get my way. But I ain't giving up. Not on him or me. I want you to reconsider your rejection.
You are a pugilist with a criminal record.
Well, look at St. Matthew, St. Augustine, St. Francis. I mean, some of the most remarkable figures in the history of the church are reformed men.
Yes, but I think what the church needs now, more than ever, is to elevate the standard for a priest.
No, what the church needs is somebody who's gonna fight for God. That's me.
Mel, tell me about working on this role. Bill is part of, really, it's his story as well. This broken man leaves his family. His son he wants nothing to do with, and then they rediscover each other and he finds his role. What drew you to the role as Rosie wrote it?
You know, I mean, I've got 7 sons, right? And you don't do a perfect job with everybody. And, you know, I've had to do that makeup stuff where you go by and you go back and do another flyby and try and, you know, write things that maybe weren't perfect and talk about stuff. And those are the most fulfilling things for me. I think, because we've all made mistakes. And I think Bill was probably in that boat, too. I know I talked to him on the phone, and just a few little things he said kind of told me who he was. He's not somebody who's terribly demonstrative, but he's very deep in his feelings.
There's a piece of the tale that is left out here, where after Stu becomes a priest, he continues his ministry, his family not only reunites, they convert to the Catholic faith.
Oh, yeah, they were both baptized at the same time. His parents were baptized by Archbishop Thomas, and Stu was literally on a gurney, you know, tears streaming down his face. Assisted living, he had oxygen at the time, and that was his, I think, his crowning achievement.
Yeah, the fulfillment of his
mission.
Yeah, beautiful.
Get his parents.
Did you write Bill with Mel in mind?
I did, yes.
Wow.
He had no choice but to play the role, right?
Tell me about the touch of God that only comes through pain and suffering. This is not something people necessarily want to deal with. It's not something even religion avoids many times. Why did you decide that you wanted to take this head on? Is that what appealed to you about his story?
I think, I've been really focused on my faith for quite some time, and I had a very troubled past. It was my faith that allowed me to turn my life around and get back on the right road. And so I was always thinking about how could I give back and do more and utilize what's been given to me for the greater purpose and what God really gave it to me for. And I always really admired what Mel did with the Passion and that love letter that he created to the Lord, and I was like, wow, that certainly inspired me. And I always figured out, okay, there was going to be a point where I was going to have to focus a lot more on me doing God's work and focusing less on trying to build up me as the kind of actor, producer, or my entrepreneurial endeavors, what I was doing. And so this thing just kind of came to me. It was the same thing about getting involved in church more and being a participant as opposed to being a spectator. Starting even little things like doing the collection and then hosting the Festival of Families. And these are things that I always felt uncomfortable being a part of, but I knew I should be doing more. And so now this is just, again, Stu kind of took me and utilized me to continue to, amplify his voice and message.
So it's a personal walk of faith in many
Absolutely,
ways for you.
And this is the starting point to now me doing a lot more. So and you don't put it out there and then just say, oh well, I'll get to it next time. Or I got these other 3 movies I don't want to do, then I'll do it. I mean, I'm putting myself out there and making sure that I continue to do.
Well, it's
good
a
stuff.
spectacular performance, and the movie it's true. And let's face it, there's a lot of cheese that enters the marketplace that's so-called faith-based. Yeah, you don't need faith when everything's perfect. When you're a perfect individual, why do you need redemption? Mel, Mark mentioned The Passion. That is it's still such a seismic and iconic film for so many people. I know you're working on the sequel. Almost every day somebody will come up and say, is the sequel done? Is he working on the sequel? What's Mel doing with the sequel? What are you doing? Where is the resurrection?
Well, it's a huge subject, and it's not a linear narrative. So that in order to have it mean something and resonate for almost anybody that watches it, again, you're not preaching to the choir. You have to juxtapose the central event that I'm trying to tell with everything else around it, in the future, in the past, and in other realms. And it's getting a little sci-fi out there. It's a big story. It's a difficult concept, and it's taken me a long time to focus and find a way to tell that story in a way that really delivers to somebody who may know nothing about any of the central story.
So when can we expect the script, Mel?
Wow. Well, I got 2 scripts.
Randy Wallace did one.
Yes. And another fella did another one. And so I got the pair of them, and they're both good.
And now you have to shuffle the deck.
Kind of. It's a little bit like that. Plus, you have to add your own mojo to it, your own sensibilities. And there's a lot of material to draw from, believe me.
Mark, as I watched this movie again, Father Stu, we've had your brother Jim on the show before. Tell me about the Wahlberg Foundation, Family Foundation, and how this all connects for you, the philanthropic work as well as your artistic work.
When I was able to kind of turn my life around and started to do good things, I just wanted to make sure that I could create opportunities for inner city kids and at-risk youth growing up in similar situations, and especially back home. I didn't want to forget about kids back home, because you're in a big city, you have some of the best, college institutions in the world right there, but yet you don't feel like you have any access to any of that, right? You either kind of got 1 or 2 kind of opportunities to get out, and if not, you're in for life. And so I just wanted to create opportunities and be an example. And then my brother, who has also had a very difficult childhood and upbringing, we just shared that in common. And he's been now sober 30-something years. Nice. He's dedicated his life to serving God and serving people, and so we just decided it was going to be something that we did together. And he's very good at meeting and tapping into people who are, you know, in a position to be able to give, and then we utilize those funds and match them and do everything we can to, you know, create good opportunities for kids and let them see something outside of
Their world.
yeah, where we come from.
What's next, Mark? What are you working on now?
We're just going to continue on, city to city, state to state, kind of, you know, showing people the movie and getting people to kind of experience Stu and his journey. And then after that, I'm off to Europe to make a movie, and then kind of figuring out something else.
All right.
Yeah.
What are you working on next?
I've got a couple other projects that I've neglected while making this film, but I have another project that I'm hoping Mark will inhabit.
She did such a good job with Father Stu that immediately before we'd even really seen a director's cut, we saw an editor's assembly. We were trying to make a 3-picture deal with Rosie.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
I can see why.
Yeah.
I can see she was a good gamble, I'll tell you that. Mel, your final thoughts on how do you think the various pieces that came together here, the faith aspect as well as the artistry and the unexpected director, how all of that conspired to enrich this story that could have very easily gone in a very different way.
Yeah, well, it's not an easy story to tell,
No, it's hard.
and it's not an easy story to tell well. So I think you start with the fact that you had someone who's able to tackle it, who's talented at being able to express things, as you say, without actually expressing them fully and leaving the room. I mean, that's an art that, in one who so young has I don't know where she got it from, but she's an old soul, and I've known her for a long time now. But
Hang around with old people.
yeah, she hangs around with old people, she said. Yeah, good. But
Don't we feel
Let me
nice
group
now?
you into that.
That's fine.
Thanks a lot.
I'm definitely up there. We could play brothers as easily as father and son.
anytime, yeah.
I'm glad she referred to only the two of you. Go ahead, Mel. You were saying.
I forgot where I was at. Well, how did it all come together? It was just like, there's a lot of providence involved. I mean, she's a deep thinker, so she was able to bring all her skill and who she is as a person to it, and then give us things, give us little gifts in the roles. I mean, the humor. I mean,
Oh,
she's
the
funny.
humor is really, yeah.
She's hilarious. I mean, it's funny because she's funny.
But every step of the way, the powers that be have been at work, and intercession has been pretty clear and evident. And when the Stu story coming to me, me kind of going down all these different paths and ending up with them, us now kind of being in a situation where everything that I kind of hoped would happen has happened through a lot of hard work and, again, a lot of intercession. And so we've been, you know, lots of time and thought and prayer and, you know, and then the magic. The magic.
So you really
It's-
prayed
the
this
movie's
thing
been
into
blessed.
existence.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I'll leave it there. It is a gift, as you said. It is a gift to I think, viewers and certainly me. It was extremely moving, and I think it touches people in ways they don't expect. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Happy Easter.
Thank you.
Great to
Pleasure.
see you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Mark.
it.
Thank you,
Raymond.
Rose.
Thank you.
My friend. Easy there.
Did his back in.
Don't do that. No lumbago.
Father Stu, starring Mark Wahlberg, Mel Gibson, written and directed by Rosalind Ross, is out in theaters Wednesday, April 13th during Holy Week. It's worth a look. My next guest is truly a legend in the music industry. Teenager in Love, The Wanderer, Runaround Sue, they've all become standards. Throughout his 6-decade career, he's recorded well over 40 albums, the latest of which, Stomping Ground, was released late last year. But tonight, he's here to tell us about another project, the long-awaited stage musical based on his life and music. It's called, appropriately, The Wanderer. It's running now through April 24th at the Paper Mill Playhouse in Millburn, New Jersey. And it's a must-see. Please welcome back to the program, member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the Bronx's own DION. DION, thanks for being back on the show. I want to start with this new musical at Paper Mill, The Wanderer. The run just started. Let's talk about the show itself. Now, you've been working on this for quite a while, and like so much else, I know it was delayed due to the pandemic. It's a jukebox musical that covers your tough upbringing in the Bronx, your rise to fame, and of course, finding the love of your life, Susan. but it doesn't shy away from the dark side of your story, your battle with addiction and your faith. What is it like for you to sit in a theater and watch the story of your life play out on stage?
Oh, Raymond, it's first of all, it's a joy to be with you. It's
Thank
crazy to watch this show. It's so surreal, you know. To first of all, I'll tell you a few things.
Okay.
You know, all my life, I'm easy to figure out. You know, I heard Hank Williams and Jimmy Reed when I was a youngster, and it hurled me into a place of enchantment and, you know, of pleasure and beauty and you know, delight. And all my life I've been looking for that inside me so I could find something and get it out physically to transmit that and bring others to that experience that I had when I was a, you know. So this show is like a 2.5-hour trip that definitely takes you through a range of emotions, and it takes you to a place of enchantment, you know.
How did the idea for this musical come about, and how much input did you have in the production?
Well, a lot. My friend Charles Messina, who's a great playwright, he's New York bred and born. You know, he walks the streets, and we usually have lunch together. And one day he said, "Dion, how does a Catholic Italian kid get inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame?" And I started to tell him that there was no rock and roll when I was a kid. There was, you know, I mean, yeah, you know, and I explained the journey, and he never had paper in front of him or a computer. But one day he put this whole thing together, and it, you know, just from our talks, and you know, it's all about when he pulled it back to me, I saw the early rock and roll history on the streets, and the you know, the romance and the action and the betrayal and the overcoming and the laughs and the songs that he wanted to insert that really, now when I watch it, Raymond, to answer your question, I'm watching it and I say, no wonder people bought these records. This is good.
Well, it's a journey, but I love that it's marrying the biographical background of some of these songs and the life you lived and your part and role in rock and roll history, which shouldn't be underestimated. I want to give folks a taste of this, the great music. Here's a little number from The Wanderer. Watch.
From a run around shoe, yeah. I'm not listening to the smile on her face, the touch of her hand in his skirt's one face. So if you don't want to cry like I do, I keep away from a run around shoe.
Wow. I can only imagine what it's like for you to watch this. I mean, it's like watching yourself, you know, reborn in a younger shell here, Dion. Tell me about the casting of these young actors, who some of them were literally born yesterday. Mike Wartella plays you. Did the actors get the era of the late 50s, early 60s right? Did you give them any notes?
Yeah, Mike Wartella gets it totally. He gets, you know, because, you know, Chuck Berry was singing about schools and cars, and I was singing about tough stuff on the streets. I don't know, you know, like, and it was black music filtered through an Italian neighborhood. It comes out with an attitude. It's on the one. It's like, I'm the type of guy that likes them. It's hard. It's strong. It's tough. Because that's what the Bronx was, and that's what I brought into rock and roll. And he got into it immediately. But let me tell you a little story, Raymond. This is crazy. Christy Altamar, who is, you know, she played Anastasia. She had the lead in Anastasia on Broadway. She's plays Susan, my love, and I'm still married. We just celebrated 59 years of marriage. My child, yeah, I met her when she was 15. I was 17. So actually, she was 14. I was 16. But anyway, Christy Altamar does an a cappella version of Teenager in Love in the second act. And Raymond, I'm watching this, and I said, I never knew what this song was about until now. I've sung it I've sung it for 50 years. I mean, 60 years. I never knew what it was about until I heard her sing it. It just broke my heart, you know.
Well, this is what I love about musicals is, you know, these performers and the story in context can break these songs open and give them new meaning that, frankly, even the writers don't know are there. I mean, that's really what's happening here.
Absolutely. I was talking to Bob Gaudio about it, you know, from the Four Seasons, and he was saying he experienced the same thing. He said when he watched the show, he said, no wonder why people bought these records, you know, they were good.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, you know, Dion, musicals always are done with kind of a heightened sense of reality, and there is some artistic license. Did they get the essence of you? And what was it like when the rock and roll playbook was still being written? Did they capture that?
They absolutely did, Raymond. Charles Messina, you know, because he's from New York and he feels the streets and the sounds and the movement of it, you know. But I'll tell you, you know, the one thing that the play isn't about, you know, usually you get these jukebox musicals where somebody, you know, they're brought up in this little neighborhood and they have all these obstacles and they work through them and they're Carnegie Hall. This is not like that. We went beyond fame and fortune and wealth, pleasure, power, honor. We said, hey, there's success and fulfillment are two different things. So we took it a step above. The musical is about transformation. It's about redemption. It's about enchantment. It's about fulfillment. It's about hope. And I think that the country can use a story about hope right now.
I agree. Well, look, your faith also, which you've talked about quite openly on this show and other places, there's a scene in the play where Monsignor Pernicone, that you share with him about suffering and surrendering to your faith, which saved you. How important was it to you that the show include that part of your story?
It's everything, Raymond. You know, my friend Ralph Martin wrote a book called The Fulfillment of All Desire. If you understand the title of that book, you don't even have to read it. But, you know, Jesus Christ, he is the fulfillment of all desire. I couldn't plan this show if I tried. I really feel it's God's show, and I'm in the palm of his hand. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm in the hands of the one who holds the future. And I just sit back, I relax, and I enjoy it.
And where is it going? Is it going to go to Broadway? What's your hope for it?
Well, that's what they're hoping. You know, it's a step at a time. We just, we do it a little at a time, you know. I think it's a play that cannot be denied, and it's a hit. I mean, people are coming out. I'm promoting, I know, but what I'm hearing is, I got to see this again. So I said, that's a good compliment.
Yeah, I'll say. Now, Dion, before we go, I have to ask you about your most recent album, Stomping Ground. This is a terrific follow-up to Blues with Friends, which we featured before. This new album has an incredible lineup: Bruce Springsteen, Eric Clapton, Peter Frampton. This is a sequel, really, to Blues with Friends. How do you stay so prolific?
You know, Raymond, during the pandemic, with all the horror stories, and I know it was rough on so many of my friends, and you know, just around the world. But for me, it was just crazy, a creative time. I had nowhere to go, Raymond. So I'm in the house and I must have stepped under the wellspring of creativity because I wrote 30 of the greatest songs I've ever written. It's got to be God in my life because I couldn't plan it if I tried. So I started doing these songs, and I send one to Eric Clapton. He said, "Oh man, I'd love to play on some. You were part of my musical wake up when I was a kid. Yes, I'll do it." And he got on, and then I made friends with Peter Frampton. I never knew Peter Frampton, but one of the most wonderful guys on the face of the planet. Really a very cool guy. So, and then I had, many friends like Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top. They all, they helped me out, just a lot. Joe Bonamassa has been great, and, all
it's
these.
an incredible album.
Thank you
I've been
so
listening
much.
to it in the car. It's as good or better than Blues with Friends, which I didn't think you could top. How do you keep these pipes in such incredible shape? You're what, 82 now, Dion? I hate to give your age, but you're timeless.
I'm going to be 83 in July, but I'll be honest with you, Raymond. I cleaned up my act 54 years ago. I haven't had a drink or a drug. I quit smoking. I was a mess in 1968. I was just, I came to an end of my life on my terms. I don't live my life on my terms anymore. I just look up in the morning, ask for some guidance, and say an Our Father. I go on my, put on the armor.
There you go. Put it on and off you go. Well, look, you're in great shape. I love the musical. I can't wait to see it. The stage musical, The Wanderer, based on the life and music of Dion, running now through April 24th at the Paper Mill Playhouse in Millburn, New Jersey. If you're in the Manhattan or Newark area, if you're traveling, you can get tickets and more information at thewanderermusical.com. Thewanderermusical.com, and Dion's latest record, Stomping Ground, is available on all the streaming platforms and wherever music is sold. Dion, thank you for being here. Happy Easter to you, my friend.
God bless you, Raymond. Thank you for the time, man.
Thank you. She is chief legal correspondent for Fox News and host of Fox News at Night, as well as a best-selling author. Her brand new book, The Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak, Lessons on Faith from 9 Biblical Families, is in bookstores now. Please welcome back to the program my friend Shannon Bream. Hey, Shannon. Now, this is your second book on women in the Bible. This one focuses on these 9 biblical families where the women are either mothers or daughters. How did you choose which women to include this time out?
Well, we thought, let's look through the family lens for faith and see how that works in these women's lives. So we have mothers and daughters. We have spiritual mothers and daughters, are people who come together through different circumstances, whether adoption or marriage or tragedy in some cases. We have mothers and sons, and we have fathers and daughters. So we're looking for all those different lenses, and we thought it gives us a unique way to dig into these women's lives, get to know them better. And listen, some families are great. A lot of families in the Bible are dysfunctional, which I think should be encouraging because we can learn from both kinds of families and see that God was able to work in both kinds of circumstances.
Yeah, and you have some rather dysfunctional relationships here in this book, including the relationship between King Saul and his daughter Michal. Now, tell us a bit about that relationship and why you chose to include this particular daughter in the story, in your book.
So, well, this is a very complicated story. And if you want to learn how not to be a father to a daughter, this is the story that you want to read. Because listen, King Saul, I mean, I really think at some point he became mentally unstable, but he was not above using his daughters as pawns in these different political schemes that he came up with. And at one point, Michal is very much in love with David. It's one of the few things that we ever see in the Bible passages where we see a woman yearning or expressing this love or desire for a man. And she wants to be with him. Well, he continues to grow in stature, and Saul is very wary of him. He considers him a rival, a threat to himself. So he goes ahead and decides, I'm going to marry off Michal to David, but I'm going to send him on all these dangerous missions and put him in all these horrible positions so he'll maybe get killed and I won't have to worry about him anymore. Instead, David again and again triumphs. They get married. Well, Saul doesn't stop trying to kill his son-in-law, like literally throwing spears at him and coming up with plots that put Michal right in the middle of this very dysfunctional relationship where her father essentially used her to try to get to the things he wanted to accomplish by hurting the man who was her husband. So if you think you have problems with your in-laws, you have nothing on King Saul, Michal, and David.
Well, let's hope you have nothing on them. Now, you were familiar with many of these stories before you sat down to write, obviously. What was the experience of rereading them through this lens, and how had some of these stories changed for you on examination?
Yeah, I do love that it gives you a different perspective because, you know, we start the book with Jochebed and Miriam, the mother and sister of Moses, and highlight the bravery that these women had to have, and remembering to reset the stage that they were basically slave women. They were Hebrew slaves under this oppression of the Egyptians, of Pharaoh. And so they had really no freedom, no choices in their lives. In fact, the Hebrew women had been told, if you give birth to a baby boy, he must be killed and thrown into the Nile River because God was prospering and favoring them. They were growing in stature and in number. And instead, Jochebed, when she held baby Moses, the Bible tells us there's almost a special vision that she had, or discernment about him being a different child. And she made one choice that she could make that could risk her own life, was to have this baby and to save him and to hide him. And then Miriam, her daughter, is part of the brave decision they made to this plot to preserve his life. And of course, he ends up being monumental in the history of Israel and of being the one who leads them on this exodus out of Egypt to the promised land. So women like that are courageous and pure and faithful. And it's great to see them and look at them through the lens of their relationship together. And the same thing can be said of women who came together who weren't blood relatives, but Mary and Elizabeth, Naomi and Ruth, beautiful pictures of those relationships too.
Yeah. One of the things you write about is women facing hardship and how they parallel the struggles of women today. And I want to read an excerpt from the book. This is the Virgin Mary escaping from Herod and fleeing to Egypt with Joseph and the baby Jesus. You write, the journey would have been long and exhausting. The young family, probably leaving their native land for the first time, set out across the rugged plains of Sinai, carrying a toddler, trudging through thirst and weariness, across an expanse of sand and rugged hills. Now, Shannon, there are obvious parallels to what we're seeing today in Ukraine, in Africa. What has it been like for you, having worked on this book and reporting the contemporary version of it night after night?
Yeah, there is oppression around the globe, as you know. I mean, Raymond, you report on these stories too. It's never ending. There's always somebody in crisis and in struggle. And so when I was writing the book, I talked about us having compassion and mercy for people who are refugees fleeing oppression and violence and poverty and all of these things, that we somehow in our world have to figure out how to best help people and to really be Christ and be the hands and feet to them in their desperate need. But obviously, when I wrote that book and was finishing up late last year, we had no idea what would be unfolding in Ukraine. So to watch it, I was immediately drawn back to that story of Mary and Joseph, where they had to grab baby Jesus in the middle of the night and take off because of that warning from God. And I think about these Ukrainian women who, many of them, most of them are leaving their husbands behind, and maybe their sons, their older sons who could stay and fight. And they're grabbing their small children, maybe with the clothes on their back, maybe a diaper bag, and taking off, just trying to get to the safest, nearest border that they can get to. And they're showing incredible bravery. And just as God was watching over Mary and Joseph and very much aware of their struggle and that journey that they made with no warning and with no planning, he sees the suffering of these women and of these families in Ukraine and other spots around the world. He is not absent from suffering. He understands it. We know that because Christ walked this planet and suffered just as we do. We're told we have a high priest who knows our suffering. And that is a comforting thing in watching this just destruction and devastation to these families.
That's terrible. In your book, you write about spiritual motherhood, saying, quote, it involves guiding and leading someone in faith. Not all of us will be called to biological motherhood, but we can all exercise the role of spiritual motherhood. We can lead young women to Jesus by word and example, becoming a sounding board for their questions and our challenges. If they're still in our lives, let's be sure to thank them. Now, as a practicing Christian, as a wife with a demanding career, what is your advice on how to offer that spiritual motherhood to help women along their faith journey?
I think you got to just show up in life, be vulnerable, invest the time in relationships, which we all feel pulled in a million directions with all of the obligations that we have professionally and personally, and even in our churches and in our sanctuaries. There are good things, and we have to find a way to balance them as best we can. But I know the relationships that I have with women who are more mature than me in the faith, and I look at them as spiritual mothers, or the young women God has brought into my life is such a blessing now navigating career and relationship. I think part of it is just living your life in a way that gives them a model or an example to look to, but also being there when they have a horrible diagnosis or breakup or get fired or just need to make a difficult decision, to listen to them, to pray with them, to offer them advice from scripture, because it's all there. God's promises and verses are there. And I'm so grateful for women who've poured into my life that way. And now in most cases, I'm on the other side of that, hoping to bring along young women who, listen, they encourage me too. They are strong in their faith. This next generation is ready to change the world, and they're doing it.
Shannon, who is the person you most relate to of all the women you've researched and written about in this book?
You know, I tell this story, and we don't even know her name, but she's in the Gospels multiple times. And she's this woman who, when we meet her, has been suffering with an issue of bleeding for 12 years. She has no money left. She's exhausted every option. And to think about at that time period, too, she would have been considered probably unclean, like she couldn't leave the house. She couldn't go to the temple. She couldn't go to the market. She's very isolated. And I've been open about struggling with some serious chronic illness and pain that I lived with. And I just love her story, because what she does is think, I've heard about Jesus. He's got all these crowds now. He's performing miracles. And she thinks, if I can just go touch the hem of his garment, that's going to be enough. She does that. She breaks all the rules, goes out into the crowd. She finds him and touches the hem of his garment. We're told immediately she's healed. Now, Jesus knew the power went out from him and that she had been completely healed. And he turns around and asks this rhetorical question, who touched me? We know he knows. And she falls down trembling before him and in fear, and confesses the whole story to him. And instead of judging her or berating her for what she's done, he says to her, in all accounts, the very first thing is, daughter. And he says, your faith has made you whole. And he sends her away completely healed. And I love so many parts of her story, because those 12 years of suffering and pain must have been horrendous for her, and to be so isolating. But now she's able to go back to everyone in her community. They all know her story, to say, this guy's the real deal. He's the Son of God. I've been healed. It's a miracle. And so her pain wasn't for nothing. And also the fact that he telegraphs to her complete acceptance, though she's broken the rules. He says, you've done the right thing. And he telegraphs to everyone there who may have judged her, if they knew her story, to say, this woman is my daughter. She's done the right thing. Her faith has made her whole. I just love everything about that story.
Yeah, well, I love that it's a woman, but we, as you said, we don't know her name. I would have thought Ruth or the Virgin Mary, or that's an interesting choice, Shannon Bream. I like that.
I do too.
But before we go, I want to get your take on the Supreme Court. Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, you've been covering this entire hearing. She's expected to be confirmed as the first black woman as a Supreme Court justice this week, after a bipartisan group of senators voted on Monday to advance the nomination. As a reporter who covers the Supreme Court, what changes do you think we might see with this confirmation? How might it impact the dynamics of the court as you see them today?
Well, even people who tell me they're voting against her say they love her winning personality. She's very collegial. I mean, that stuff counts at the Supreme Court. You got to be brilliant, but you also have to be able to persuade other justices, you hope, with your intellect, but also with your personality, to build coalitions, to get them to vote with you, to see your way. She may be good at that. We'll have to see how that plays out, but a lot of people think that's going to be a big strength for her. She also brings a couple different things to the bench, and that she's been a federal defense attorney. The fact that she's been that she has been a public defender at the federal level with people like Gitmo detainees, and that's a very different thing. We don't have anybody on the court who's done that. She's worked in criminal law. She's worked in a number of different areas that aren't the traditional path for a justice. So I think she's going to have a different take, and I'll be interested to see who her coalitions build up with. I expect she's going to vote with the left on most big cases, but she does have different things that she brings to the table, including a family that's full of law enforcement and their background. And so I do think she's got some unique perspectives. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yeah, we only know in time how they, how they will rule and the impact they might have on those around them, but we'll see. What do you hope people take from this new book, Shannon? And what are you hearing from women particularly?
I hope they'll be encouraged and drawn closer to God, of course, but I hope that they'll see through these families that are, beautiful and stable and strong, and the ones that are really messed up and flawed, that God can still work through all of it. None of us is perfect. I am a sinner saved by grace every single day, but I hope that they'll look at these women and say, gosh, I can relate to that. These are things like infertility and widowhood, fleeing famine and war and danger, medical problems, financial problems, family problems. And I hope if they're struggling with any of those things or anything else, they'll see that God is faithful through that, and that he promises us his faithfulness. He shows up and he works through even our biggest messes.
Shannon Bream, thank you for being here. The Mothers and Daughters of the Bible Speak: Lessons on Faith from 9 Biblical Families by Shannon Bream is available at bookstores everywhere and online. Happy Easter, Shannon.
You too, Raymond. God bless you.
Robert Royal is next, but first, some sad news. An 83-year-old American nun has been kidnapped from her convent in West Africa this week. Maronite sister Sue Ellen Tennyson, who is 83 years old, was abducted from her home in Yalgo, Burkina Faso, where she's been serving as a missionary. Her bishop reports that Sister Tennyson was taken sometime between April 4th and 5th by an unidentified gunman who also vandalized the convent she shared with 2 others in her community. Sister Tennyson is also a New Orleans native. She's been assigned to Burkina Faso since 2014. New Orleans Archbishop Gregory Raymond has added his voice to the appeals for Sister Tennyson's safe return. Please keep her in your prayers. The ambassador to Ukraine just presented his credentials to Pope Francis as a secret meeting focused on targeting so-called opposition to Pope Francis is organized by progressives. Joining me now with analysis of these stories and more is the editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal. He joins us from EWTN studios in Rome. Bob, I want to begin with what Pope Francis had to say during his Wednesday audience this past week regarding this war in Ukraine. He says, after World War II, the attempt was made to lay the foundations of a new era of peace, but unfortunately, we never learn, right? The old story of competition between the greater powers went on, and in the current war of Ukraine, we're witnessing the impotence of the organizations of the United Nations. Bob, your comments and thoughts on the Pope's observations here, and the Ukrainian ambassador to the Holy See presented his credentials to the Pope this week. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I think this reflects a bit of naivete on the part of the Holy Father, in the sense that the UN, as we know in the United States, has never really been capable of dealing with crises like this. It's the great powers, it's the Security Council with the 5 permanent members and the rotating members that have to deal with crises like this, particularly warfare. And for me, it's actually unrealistic to expect war simply to go away, or international mechanisms to stop international conflicts, because we live in a fallen world.
Now, the Pope has been very clear in his opposition to this war. I think he's done everything diplomatically and otherwise. I mean, he even engaged Patriarch Kirill a few weeks ago, which I thought was such an important gesture on his part to put a stake in the ground and say, no, religion can't be used to justify the slaughter of innocents anywhere in the world. And during his trip to Malta this past weekend, the Pope had this to say about Putin's aggression situation in Ukraine. He said, once again, some potentates sadly caught up in anachronistic claims of nationalist interest is provoking and fomenting conflicts, whereas ordinary people sense the need to build a future that will either be shared or not at all. Now, Bob, he has yet to call out Putin by name, but this is part of the Vatican diplomatic stance always, because they want to be the peacemakers and perhaps facilitate some negotiation.
Yeah, I think that that's fine. You know, the new Ukrainian ambassador, who's Orthodox, by the way, has said that the Pope has done essentially everything he could possibly do. And I think we have to commend him for that. He's played a conspicuous role in trying to resolve this situation. The trouble, like with the UN comments that we just talked about, is to think that warfare has somehow become anachronistic. You know, it's a sad thing to say this, but I don't believe warfare is ever going to disappear. I think it's probably a biblical perspective to say that it will not disappear until the Lord's second coming. So, sure, we can do certain things. A potentate, though, can decide to do some things that seem to go back. You know, John Kerry made a similar remark that this is sort of a 19th century way to resolve problems. Well, you know, warfare and human greed and human ambition don't observe centuries. They are pretty much constant across time.
Yeah, the Pope also, he alluded to a possible trip to Kiev. You know, he's been invited by the mayor of Kiev to visit the country. I don't quite know how that would be possible, certainly not during an ongoing war, but and there's been no timeline. But your thoughts on even musing about the possibility of such a visit?
Yeah, I think it would be great if it can be worked out, if all the the details, he's safe and he's able to make statements there. I think this would be a tremendous thing. Now, what we have to recognize, though, is as in the consecration of Russia and Ukraine to Our Lady of Fatima, although Fatima was not mentioned very prominently in that consecration, there is this kind of Russian, let's say, bias against the Latin Church, against the Western Church, and in a strange way, the Russians themselves, Putin and his henchmen, may think of this as sort of the spiritual equivalent of a NATO presence in a country bordering theirs that they think should not be there. So I think from our perspective, I think it's a good thing for the Holy Father to show that support, to go there physically and to show his support for those people in person. Whether it will have any effect in Russia, that would remain to be seen, and I fear that his good intention might produce some bad reaction.
Bob, this trip to Malta was originally scheduled for May of 2020, and it was to focus on the issue of migration. Now, the issue took more significance due to the exodus of over 4 million Ukrainian refugees in recent weeks. Pope Francis focused his remarks on the Mediterranean migration route and what he sees as Europe's flawed migration policies. He called for the Mediterranean to be a, quote, theater of solidarity, not the harbinger of a tragic shipwreck of civilization, end quote. The Pope has criticized often European nations for their migration policies. How were those remarks received, especially in light of what we're seeing happening in Ukraine and outside of it these days?
Well, as you know, the first visit that he made as Pope was to Lampedusa, which is an island very, very close to the African coast. And he was, in the very beginnings of his papacy, he was advocating for more lenient immigration practices for people coming from Africa. For an American or for other people, I think the way to think about this is like our border crisis, where you could have huge numbers of people coming illegally into the European countries. And that's why the individual countries themselves have been resisting. He's actually said it's a crime that they're resisting, and that these camps in Libya are like lager. They're like the concentration camps that the Nazis ran. And of course, the situation is terrible there. But the difference, I think, with that situation, which has to be managed, and the situation in Ukraine is that you really do have people in immediate danger of losing their lives. And a lot of those Ukrainians who are going into Poland and the Czech Republic and Slovakia, etc., plan to return once peace returns. It's not going to be like this is a permanent invasion a large number of people.
Bob, late last month, a group of 70 cardinals, bishops, and theologians gathered privately for 2 days here in the United States at Loyola University in Chicago. It was an event that they titled Pope Francis, Vatican II, and the Way Forward. Now, the conversations reportedly focused on how the U.S. opposition to Pope Francis is connected to opposition to Vatican II. Now, it was organized in part by a progressive columnist at the National Catholic Reporter, a dissenting publication. We would normally ignore this kind of thing, but the guest list, I think, demands attention. Honduran Cardinal Oscar Rodriguez Maradiaga was there, a confidant of the Pope. Cardinal Blaise Supich of Chicago, Sean O'Malley, even the papal nuncio to the U.S. was in attendance. Now, Maradiaga has been embroiled in charges of embezzlement. He described the conference this way. We have this, what they call opposition to the Pope. It's trying to build walls, going backwards, looking at the old liturgy, or maybe things before Vatican II. Vatican II is unknown by many of the young generations, so it's necessary to come back and to see that all the reforms of Pope Francis are rooted in Vatican II, end quote. What do you make of this comment and the focus here?
Well, I think it manifests a certain touchiness, if I can put it that way, on the part of some of the Pope's main supporters. Look, you and I don't oppose Vatican II, although we probably were named by name in this conference as people who oppose what Francis is trying to do. That's not at all true. There's an ongoing debate in the church about the meaning of Vatican II. Obviously, for intelligent people like John Paul II and Benedict, who are actually at Vatican II, there was one interpretation that tried to be more faithful to the actual documents. What we hear from people like this is something that really reminds me of more of the attitude of the 1970s, where everything seemed to be open and, we were going to be open to the world and let in fresh air. That's not what people who were actually there felt at the time. So, look, there's a debate about Vatican II, but to portray different views of what the Holy Father is doing as somehow a denial of a universal council of the Church, I just think that that's the wrong framing of what's happening.
Yeah. Well, according to reports, as you mentioned, EWTN and my name were taken in vain. The sad scribblers at the National Catholic Reporter have been for years, Bob, and they've written articles and books about this. Nobody reads them, but they've issued them. They've tried to establish some connections between moneyed Catholics and this network and this show in particular. Now, look, it's a cute conspiracy theory, but I'm telling you, for the record, it's completely fabricated. Unlike these periodicals, we merely report and we ask legitimate questions. I think we do it credibly and we present facts and quotes. I have also, and I say this also for the record, I have never cleared topics or editorial for the world over with anyone, including donors. But these people, they are professional liars, Bob, and now apparently they're coddled by these esteemed institutions and even esteemed individuals who I suppose think this helps them politically in Rome. I don't know what the thinking is, but opposition is when you blindly hate a person and you allow that to color your perceptions, your language, your point of view. When you describe people as opposition or the enemy, like this Sanhedrin meeting in Chicago. Now, we're engaged in credible analysis of church events, and we do it for our audience. I think, and I've always thought for 25 years, people are smart enough to see what's going on, whether I'm here or not. And that is incidentally, that idea and that philosophy of reportage, that is why we have what they do not. It's called an audience. Bob, your final thoughts. And are there so many Catholics who are objecting and rejecting Vatican II that they're now resisting Pope Francis's agenda?
Well, I've been the head of a think tank for over 20 years, a more or less conservative Catholic think tank. And whenever somebody wants to come to work for us, I tell them, look, the other guys have $1,000, maybe $10,000 for every one that we have. And if you look who attended that conference in Chicago, it's people from Boston College, from Villanova University, from Fordham University. I mean, that group has got many of the Catholic colleges and universities behind them, chanceries, all sorts of resources. Yes, of course, we do have some more conservative donors who try to support us, but it's not as if this is some massive secret. Every organization has got, financial backers of some sort or another. No, to me, there's a sensitivity there. And they're surprised because we relatively have few resources compared to what they have, and yet we have an influence. And I think you're right, and an audience, and that really kind of is a burr under the saddle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, but I have to laugh at this grand conspiracy theory. Look, one wishes that traditional organizations were as well financed and organized as these people imagine they are. Good luck. Bob, we will leave it there. For commentary from Robert Royal, visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you, Bob.
Okay, my pleasure, Raymond.
That is all the time we have for now. Be sure to join us next week for a Holy Week edition of the show. We'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Bye now.